So welcome to National 4, National 5 Chemistry. We are on Unit 3, which is Chemistry and Society, and this topic is all about fertilizers. And because this is our first lesson, what we're going to ask ourselves is, what is a fertilizer? So our aim for this lesson is to understand what a fertilizer is and what they are used for. In terms of success criteria, we want you to be able to state what a fertilizer is, and name the essential elements required for healthy plant growth, and to state what factors are essential for a fertilizer to count as a fertilizer for it to work. So when we think about fertilizers, we should really be thinking about plants and crops. Now, as the world population has been constantly increasing, it means that we need to find more efficient ways of producing food, otherwise we'll end up with starvation happening. Now, plants, as they grow, they need nutrients from the soil. And the three most important nutrients that plants need are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are called the essential elements: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the symbols for those elements are N for nitrogen, P for phosphorus, and K for potassium. So sometimes fertilizers are described as being NPK fertilizers. Now, fertilizers are any substance which is able to restore those essential elements needed for healthy growth to the soil. So a fertilizer is a chemical, either artificial or natural, that's able to give the soil nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium. Now, different plants require fertilizers containing different proportions of these nutrients. So some plants might need more nitrogen than other plants, etc. So there are different types of fertilizer that have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in different ratios. And fertilizers can be natural or they can be synthetic. And by synthetic, we don't mean fake, we mean man-made. In order for substances to be used as a fertilizer, they must have two requirements. So they must contain at least one essential element. So they can contain just nitrogen, they can contain just phosphorus and just potassium and still be a fertilizer, or they contain all three. And they also must be soluble. And when it comes to being soluble, you have to use the data booklet. Data booklet page 8 has a table of solubilities, and that's the table at the bottom. You will be using that in order to work out whether or not compounds are soluble. Now, the reason why fertilizers need to be soluble is because fertilizers are absorbed by the plant's roots, and they're actually absorbed as a solution from the soil. So they're dissolved in water. Without dissolving in water, they would just stay in the soil and not be absorbed by the plant. Now, in terms of natural fertilizer, natural fertilizers are anything made from plant or animal waste. So composting is a form of plant and animal waste. So that's when you take your waste gardening or your waste food and you let it rot slightly. That's what compost is. Or we could have manure. Now, manure is normally thought of as animal waste, but we can also have what we call green manure, which is a plant-based manure. And this is where you grow a plant that is capable of absorbing nutrients from the soil very well. And then you cut up that plant, churn it up, break it down, and put that into soil in another location so that the soil from one bit of land can be transferred to a second bit of land. When it comes to synthetic fertilizers, these are fertilizers made of ions. So they're sometimes called ionic fertilizers, and they are man-made. And they're often made by the reaction of an acid with an alkali. Examples include things like ammonium nitrate, which is really high in nitrogen, because nitrogen is in ammonium and it's in nitrate, or potassium phosphate, which is high in potassium and phosphorus. Synthetic fertilizers are compounds which can contain lots of different ions. The main ions responsible for the fertilizer properties of chemicals are the nitrate ion, NO3-, which contains nitrogen, the ammonium ion, NH4+, which also contains nitrogen, the potassium ion, which unsurprisingly contains potassium, and the phosphate ion, PO4, which contains phosphorus. Compounds can contain mixtures of these different ions to give different ratios of nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So hopefully at this stage you're able to say what a fertilizer is. A fertilizer is any chemical or material that's able to replace the essential minerals into soil. You should hopefully be able to name the essential elements required for healthy plant growth. Those are the elements N, P, and K, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And you'd hopefully be able to say what are the essential factors needed for a chemical or a material to be a fertilizer. And that is that they must contain nitrogen, phosphorus, or potassium, and they must be soluble. So now we've got some questions. What is a fertilizer? Well, a fertilizer is a substance which is added to the soil to restore the nutrients essential for healthy plant growth. What are the three essential elements? Well, those are nitrogen, N, phosphorus, P, potassium, K. What is the difference between a natural and a synthetic fertilizer? Well, a natural fertilizer occurs naturally through the breaking down of the natural rotting process of plants or food or animals, and synthetic fertilizers are man-made in the lab. Give an example of a natural fertilizer and give an example of a synthetic fertilizer. So natural fertilizer would be something like compost or manure, and a synthetic fertilizer would be something like ammonium phosphate, potassium nitrate, ammonium nitrate, potassium phosphate, any of the combinations of those ions that we said. So now we have a past paper question. So this is a common multiple choice question. Being given a list of ions, and you're asked to identify which letter corresponds to the ion that could be used in a fertilizer. And for this one, the answer is B. It's the NO3-, and that's because that's the only one of those ions that contains the letter N, P, or K. NO3 is nitrate and contains nitrogen. And our final question, identify which sulfate would contain an essential element for healthy plant growth. So which one of those letters, A, B, C, D, E, or F, would contain an essential element for healthy plant growth? So the answer for this one is A. Now that is, it might seem confusing for that, but ammonium, you need to remember that ammonium contains nitrogen, and therefore nitrogen is one of the essential elements and therefore can make that compound a fertilizer. Sodium, barium, zinc, copper, and magnesium are not essential elements, nor is sulfur in sulfate, and ammonium is the only essential element, or only thing containing an essential element, so that's our answer. So that was our introduction to fertilizers. I will see you next time for more information about fertilizers.